Hey guys, today I'm going to go over some JavaScript basics. I've set up a HTML file which has the data we're working with. It's MathFun 1000 for the current project. We're bringing in the CSS or style.css, which we don't need that. Which has all our CSS set up, hopefully correctly. We'll see once we get going. Here I have a quick little script that just sets some initial variables that we normally get from the database, but since I don't want to work on anything back end, we're just initializing it here. We've got our steps, examples, and rules. Oh, for those tuning in, this is kind of a little math tutorial program sort of thing that we're going to go over. And generating HTML via JavaScript and using jQuery eventually. So yeah, also set up some divs that we're going to reference. I've got main content. Now we can actually delete some of this. This is actually code that's from an ASP.NET. Okay. Yeah. Code from an ASP.NET project, and using NetBeans just because it has a nice little plugin with Chrome where I can run it. We'll just run it right now, and then it automatically updates here on Chrome, which is nice. So yeah, I'll show you that MathFun 1000. Hello, I am updated, and then I just Control S, save. Go back here, hey, it's updated. So, that's nice. Makes doing this really fast. Oops. Okay, so before we do anything, we need to add a JavaScript file just because having a bunch of script tags and all that isn't very nice. So we want it after all of our dividers in our HTML to reference it because we want all this stuff loaded before the JavaScript loads. And since JavaScript is loosely typed, it doesn't compile like we're used to with strictly typed languages like regular Java, C++, C#, all that fun stuff, or even C. So we need a script tag. We're going to close it. I always like closing it before I start something. Source gets, and over here you can see I have so JS, or well, it's going to start from our home directory. So JS/tutorial.js, and then see, I think it's type. We put the type in just because this makes it more compatible with HTML3 and HTML4. Don't need it, just type text CSS. So that should reference our tutorial.js file. So we can put in here, we'll do an alert. This is great for debugging or informing a user on something they might be doing wrong or whatever. You probably see these when visiting some websites and you're like, oh, I'm going to leave, and it's like, are you sure? That's a type of an alert. So we're just going to say hello world, and this will pop up when we run this over here. Hey, hello world, after it's loaded. Okay, yeah, it's going to say this multiple. Well, okay, we don't need that. We can close this. This is just where I'm recording to. Oop, not that. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay. So, now that we got that, we're going to want to show the data we make that we have right here. So we've got there are 3 global variables: step, example, rule. They're initialized to be arrays right here. That's the shorthand. We could say new array, but that is a bit slower, not just to type, actually in running. So that automatically sets it to an empty array, which is nice. Okay, so we want, hello world. Okay, let's get rid of that, because I just saved there and it just refreshed, but we're going to actually cancel that Yeah, so we're not popping up and distracting me every 2 seconds. So things we're going to need to start off is we're going to need some global variables. So I'm like var, I'm going to call it main area. I only want to call this once. I guess we could call it every time, but document dot get element by ID. This is probably one of the most handier functions in JavaScript because it lets you grab stuff by ID in your HTML. So I've got my main controller or my inner main. So I want to grab my inner main because that's the inside stuff that I want to add stuff to. So, yeah, content inner main. That's all we need there. And just to show off, we can add something to it. So we can go main area dot inner HTML, which references its inner HTML inside that div. And we'll do plus equals. We don't need to override everything. Plus equals hello world. And that should, when we run this, boop, say hello world in there, which wasn't there before. So that's cool. Alright. We don't need that anymore. But just to show you can add stuff that way. There's other ways you can add stuff. We'll get to it. Let's do it. So what we want is when this comes up, we want to show the first step of our math problem. Let's make a function called next row. That's newt row. That's not what we want. There, just declare it here. So it will call as soon as it loads this. As soon as the JavaScript file loads. So you have to keep that in mind. You can make a main class or a main function that it goes through first, but this works for what we're doing. So function. That's how you declare a function. Next row. We don't need to pass any variables. Ooh, my voice is starting to crack. Okay, so inside the row, we are going to need to reference stuff. Well, let me look at my code. Okay, so within there, we want, I'm going to call a variable. That's how there's really no types. Everything's a var in JavaScript. So you can assign var to anything. We're going to call this inner row div because we're going to have an outer row div later. But gets document dot create element. So instead of doing what we did before and just say inner HTML and just assign something to that, we can actually use this to create elements. I like it because it's more compatible among almost all browsers that I know of. So it's just a little safer. We're going to call it safer. So I'm going to make a div in there. And row, inner row div dot, and we can set attributes or attributes, how you pronounce that. Attribute. Okay, we're going to set the class attribute, which will be referenced in the CSS inside row, and will actually come in handy later. So and see attributes. So like if we go back here, we can look. You got ID. That's an attribute. Class. That's an attribute as well. Ooh. So we're just setting the class attribute. And do this another time. We're just going to copy. Come on. Copy that, and we want to set ID. Yeah. ID, we're going to call it inside row, and then what I have here is current step. So let's. Okay, here you see it highlighted to purple. That makes it think it's makes the JavaScript think it is a global variable, in which we're going to make it a global variable, but that's something. So yeah, if I didn't right here declare inner row div var in there, it would make it a global variable. So outside this function, it would exist once it's called the first time, but we don't want that because that would make it a mess. So just var inside the curly braces makes it have scope within this function. Which technically up here we don't even need to call var. It's just, for me, good practice. Or good, just easier to read. So we're also going to want var current step. And we're going to initialize that to 0. So that when you ever make a var, initialize it to what you want it to be, and you have to keep track because we could initialize it to blank for a string, but later you can initialize it to 0 and it won't throw. Yeah, we can do that, and then current step gets, and it won't throw any errors because everything is an object. Yeah, initialize it to 0. It's faster because then it just makes it an object and takes up more memory. This way it knows it's a number. So current steps. So that means when we do a next row, the ID gets inside row plus current step. That way you don't have multiple of the same IDs. Okay. And we want more inner row div dot, okay, append child. This will actually add HTML stuff from somewhere else, because in the end we're going to want to main area, we'll do that here, dot append child inner row div. Whoops. So that will actually add what we have. Let's comment this out and run it, see what we have added. So we won't see anything in here, blank. So we had an issue. Oh, there it is. Just took a bit. Computer's not as fast. So we'll view page source. Down here, got inner row, source. It did not add what I wanted it to. Is there a reason? Div class, that should have added it. Oh, that's great. This is how it goes. Okay, view source. Script, inner main, div ID class. Okay, it might not have added because there's nothing inside the div. Could be smarter than me. We can actually close that. So, inner row, main area, append child. Okay, well, it's actually append stuff to inner row. So, semicolon, don't forget that. It'll just break everything. What I have is make step. I like a lot of functions that you can use over and over. So down here, we will make another function called make step. Don't need to pass anything in. There. Okay, so make step. Each math problem has 3 parts. We've got the step, the example, and the rules, or the rule, the step. I go over here. See, we got step 0, identify the different variables. We got our example, which is just the numbers and the actual problem we want to solve, and the rule is rule here, which we don't really have any rules, so we just got to makeshift. So, make step. And in make step, we want a new div. So var, this is very similar. We'll just call this new div. Gets document dot create an element. Make a div. Okay. New div dot set attribute. We want ID gets, see, let's call it step box plus current step, new div, dot set attribute, sorry, my keyboard likes to hit enter twice when I hit it once. Class, whoops, call it step box, so our CSS knows what to do. Okay, we also want a paragraph element, so we call it var par gets document dot create element, boop, and p. And then we can do par dot text content gets step current step. And since step here, like here it's going to throw, hey, oops, pen child on node, parameter 1 type node. Oh, that's right here, because we're not returning anything yet. Save. Okay, that's nice, because it'll automatically check what I'm doing wrong. So, since up here we have made step a global variable with this array in this script, our script loading down here can see it up here. So, it knows it exists at this point. But you have to keep in mind with JavaScript, because if you flip those around, first load up, it would be like, I can't find step, I'm going to stop all JavaScript execution, and most of your stuff won't load and or won't work. So, okay. We want new div, dot pen child, par, because we want that to be inside the div. And then we return new div. So that way, when we call it up here, it should, hey, see, identify the different variables. So CSS is not reading this correctly, but we'll live at the moment. I might have named it wrong. Okay, let me look. Step box. No, I named it right. Oh, that's why. Close. That's not an actual. So that, yeah, there we go. That looks a lot better. Easier to read. At least for me. I don't know about you guys yet. We'll see. So basically, we want to do this since we've got 3 parts to every step. We're gonna just copy this twice. Pen child, instead of make step, we'll have make example. Whoops, not example. And rule. And I know it's bad juju to just copy paste, because that leads to problems, but too bad. I only have so much time, and you guys probably want to get through this pretty fast. So, really, let's change this to example box. You could name these what you want, but since I already have the CSS defined, I'm going to keep this all the same name. Create a div. That should. See, example is actually a little different. Set attribute. Yeah, so example, since, well, we can look over here. Since we already have our elements named because we want certain things, certain color within the code right here, it's already defined, so we don't need the par. We just new div dot inner HTML gets example slub current step. Okay, then we don't need this because par does not exist in this context because it is a local variable. We don't have to worry about referencing it. So in the make rule, we're actually doing par. So rule box. And there's probably better ways to do this, and anyone can argue all they want in the comments, because I basically have taught myself most of this in the past couple weeks, and I am still learning, but I am passing this information on. So that should be good. Look over here, refresh. Nothing. Okay. Rule, example. Oh, yeah. No, make step, make example, make rule. Oh, because we haven't saved that. That's why. Boop. There we go. We've got a whole step. Different variables, blah, blah, blah. Yay. Okay. So from there, we want to be able to add steps. So first, once we're done with this, yeah, we'll come back to it later. We want some buttons. I'm just going to add buttons in the freaking down here. This is why I have main controller, main controller, and inner main, is because I don't want inner main to overwrite buttons. I want the buttons to be accessible via grabbing it, well, valve IDs, but if I wanted to dynamically change them, then, or switch out the types of buttons and such, I could use main controller, or I could make another div, but that's not where we're. So we want input, oops, type gets button, press the button, value gets, we'll say next, class gets and step forward button. It's already defined in my CSS, so it knew that class existed. And on click, this is basically declaring what its event handler. If you know what event handling is, and you should, because it's very important for programming, at least with GUI, because yeah, .NET, Java, Swing has it, JavaFX, which if you don't like Swing, I would recommend JavaFX, or if you like WPF, JavaFX is very similar to that, but that has nothing to do, well, you can use JavaFX with JavaScript, but that's beyond me and why use JavaFX when you can use HTML. So, and we're going to on click call step forward. Now when this loads, it doesn't know what step forward is. However, our JavaScript should load before anyone's able to click on it, and if they did click on it, it wouldn't do anything. So got all that. Let's go down here and make a function called step forward. Did I capitalize that? No, I didn't. I don't think I did. My curly braces. Yeah, it's lowercase. So whenever you click the button, step forward would be called. To do that, make sure I did all that. I forgot one thing. It won't like it very much. Is just put that backslash there, or we could actually do /input, but since we declared the value over here to be next, we don't need to do the whole thing. So step forward, what we're going to want to do is very simple. We are just going to next row. And that, whenever we hit the button, will bring us the next row. Now you probably notice they're all the same thing. That's because we forgot something very important. Up in next row, we can actually, there. So once we're done all with this, we need to current step plus plus, which just makes current step, okay, increment itself by 1. So that means we should be able to go through, yep, separate groups into variables, combine terms, all that. Solution, there's no more, oops, undefined. So that means we need to keep going, but since there is no text there, it's still making the boxes, it just doesn't have anything. And that is a nice and bad thing about JavaScript is it won't segmentation fault or throw an error saying you've stepped outside of the array. You just don't have nothing. It's just returning null. So that's a blessing and a curse, but you always have to take that into account. So what we're going to do, this next row, see, how did I do that before? I think up here, step forward. Yeah, we'll do it up here. So we'll just make an if statement. And those of you that know your design patterns are probably screaming that I could do this better, and I could, but this is learning. And classes in JavaScript are manageable, but for this aren't super needed. Okay, and we're going to want to set as total number of steps. Can't say current step is less than total number of steps gets, and let's just go with step.length from our array, because they're all the arrays. It's bad to assume that they're going to be the same size, but since I made this data, they are the same size. But that's another check that you could probably make do with your self number of steps. Okay, come on. Total there. There, that should fix it. So next. Can't go anymore. Woo! Okay, so one more thing for this video before I go into more. I'll do that in another video. Where we use more jQuery to make it look a bit fancier, is we're going to want to do a step back, just because you might not want all that stuff there. So you can just copy our button here, which I know, bad practice. We're going to put it up here. Button, we'll call it previous, or just prev. And we'll step. What do I call it? Sorry, let me refer to my source code. Step, type. Oh, I never set an ID. I'm not sure when you step backwards. Yeah, that's what I call it. Step back. Sorry, I'm mumbling. Backwards. Backward. Button. On click. And instead of step forward, we want to step back. It'd be kind of a dick move. This is, I know, lowercase. Okay. Oops. I'm just copying it to. Okay, so without doing anything, we should have previous over here. So the reason I have a different class is because I want next to be all the way on the right, and normally it would just either be right here if you had it an inline block in CSS, or it would be right underneath, and we don't want that. We want to look nice. So that does nothing because it does nothing. Yep, see, uncaught reference error step is not defined. But even though that happened, we can still step forward because JavaScript is not an HTML. It's very loosey-goosey. Okay, so step back. I'm just going to copy this back to tutorial and move style over there. Whew, computer does not like that at the moment. Okay, I'll just function step back. Okay. I say okay a lot, I'm guessing. I apologize for things I repeat all the time. But, okay, step back. We're gonna, and my wife is laughing if you can hear that. Current step, we're gonna put it's greater than 1 because we don't want to go to 0 steps or beyond into negative because there aren't any negative steps in this example. Although that'd be a funny Easter egg to include, but not here. We're going to decrement it right away just because of how we have it set up. So var, we'll just call it inner. We don't need to get document dot get element by ID. We're going to call it inner row plus current step. Oops. Current step. And that will get us our div that we named when we made the step. And okay, actually to do this I ended up using some jQuery, so we'll just do a little bit of jQuery right here before I get into jQuery, which is referenced by this $sign. So whenever you have a $sign, just a single one, you are calling jQuery. So after the $sign, you can say, okay, what do I want to look for? We're going to look for inner. I mean, you could use document.getElementById, by ID, but this is a little cleaner. Slide up. Actually, no, we don't need to use. Sorry about that. Forget that. What we can do is inner dot parent node dot remove child inner. So what it's doing right here is calling its parent, which, yes, I know is bad practice, and you don't know how many forums and how much time I spent on Stack Overflow reading what is the best practice for removing an element, and this actually is considered the best practice because it is fast and something. I know this is referencing itself to remove itself, but it's how it works. And there are possibly better. There are other ways to do it, but this is one line of code and it works every time. So what we can do is add some steps, and then that did not work. Why did that not work? Parent node of null. Why did that not work? Parent node remove child inner. So that worked before. Let's try doing this. Control V. That might work. Boop, boop. Nope, that didn't work. Oh shoot. And I just said, oh, this is the best way. Step back. Okay. Step back. Plus current step. Oh, I spelled that right. Okay. Well, shoot, I feel stupid. Oh, shoot. That should work. Or enter. Well, what we can do is we can actually call jQuery. We should do the same thing, but not. So next, previous. Nope, that didn't work either. Well, shoot. I'm going to pause this and figure this out. Okay, I figured out the problem. So down here, I used console.log, which will log out to the console both in NetBeans, but if you are using something else, you can inspect element, give it a second. Chrome right here has a console there, so hit previous, and it's saying null, so it's logging out to that console. We can close these things. Okay, so log inner, we're getting null. The problem is I'm calling inner row, and up here I decided to call it inside row. So that is why we weren't getting anything. I was doing it correctly. I just named it wrong, which some of you may have caught. So there's that. Now that should work. Next, next, previous. That did not work. Oh, I know why. Because I commented that out. And I am not... I'll delete this. Well, okay, I closed that, so I'll start this back up. Doop, doop, previous, and we should get here, object HTML div element. Okay, so that's what it logged up. What we want to do is, and we'll get rid of the console, don't need that. We want inner dot get, to get parent, no, parent node, sorry, parent node dot remove child inner. Okay, so that should be it. There we go. See, now we remove it. So, sorry about that hiccup. So I'm going to end this video here. It's basic what we want. Next video I will cover some very basic jQuery stuff. So yeah, I hope this was informative, at least hopefully from my teammates that are watching this. Might not be super informative for people coming in straight, but yeah, one of the reasons I made this because I was super... It was difficult because when looking up JavaScript tutorials, it either assumed you've never coded in your life, or that you were already a pretty decent at JavaScript and just needed help with one little thing. And yeah, so that's one of the reasons I'm making this video. Clear up the space. So yeah, I will see you in the next one.